When speaking of World War II soldiers, usually many people imagine sturdy, brave men in the first place, often overshadowed by equally courageous women. And that is not quite right. There were also many selfless individuals among women who did not hesitate to sacrifice themselves in the name of victory. Soviet sniper Tatiana is in fact one of them. The future hero of the Soviet Union was born in 1919 in the USSR in the family of a driver. Her family had many children and only her father was earning money, so it was hard to call her childhood a good one. Moreover, at one time both parents were engaged in trade of bread, which had a negative impact on the further life of the family, as traders were not really feeling good in young Soviet state. It went so far that they were deprived of suffrage, which recovery with great difficulty her mother achieved after only a few years, and only for herself. However, despite all the difficulties, according to recollections of contemporaries, the girl grew up cheerful and friendly, very fond of sports, especially swimming. She did not forget to help with housework, since there were many children. In 1933, she entered a pedagogical school. It seemed that a girl's life was predetermined. Her profession was to work with children. Tatiana was pretty happy about it. She loved children. So after graduating from the college and enrolling later in 1940 at the Moscow Pedagogical Institute, she also took a job as a kindergarten teacher. By that time, she already had experience working with children, since she had managed to work at school between the college and the institute. However, she realized her biggest passion later. Tatiana received the news of the outbreak of war with great excitement. Her heart immediately awakened an irrepressible desire to take part in hostilities, and she did not hesitate to apply to the military enlistment office. But the young woman was rejected. There was a great shortage of medical personnel, and colleges were open to train externships for nurses. In one of such schools, Tatiana was offered to enter, explaining that by learning to properly provide first aid to the wounded, it can bring much more benefit than out of an experience just to die on the front line. The girl immediately agreed. At the beginning of 1943, she, who had already completed all the courses, was offered an admission to the Women's Sniper School. For the first time in her life, the young woman picked up a rifle and, deep down within herself, she understood that only now she realized her true destiny. Eyewitnesses say that from the first days of training, she began to show simply brilliant results. Everyone noted that the young woman literally merged with the weapon. Together, they presented a frightening picture. Tatiana herself felt how she changed when she picked up a rifle, that there was only one desire in sight: to quickly apply her skills on enemies. Nazis. After graduation, she was sent to the front, and already there, with her professional actions, she quickly earned the respect of her senior comrades. Well, when the number of destroyed fascists was 16 people, then the enemies began to talk about her too. At the same time, those around her never noticed any kind of semblance of bloodthirstiness or gloating on Tatiana's part. On the contrary, when there were brief respites between maneuvers and battles, and the soldiers gathered together and spent time talking, the girl often recalled her parents, her life in her hometown, and her work at school. The letters that Tatiana wrote to her mother and sisters are stunning in their essence and still are preserved till our days. Here is a fragment of one of them. Let's take a look.
Greetings from the front, my dear mother, Lala. On April 3rd, I arrived at the front. We were well met. On April 8th, I was in the front line for the first time. On this day, I killed 2 fascists. At first, my hands were trembling and my heart was beating, but soon it all disappeared and I had the desire to kill and beat the enemies as much as possible. We'll leave for the mission at 3 o'clock in the morning. Mom, don't worry about me. Everything is going well. Regards, Tanya.
Tatiana received the main blow from the wrong side of the road. Somehow, during another ambush, she began to observe suspicious movements of the bushes ahead of her with her rifle scope. But she could see nothing because of a sudden cloudy spot in her eye. After a while, the spot disappeared and Tatiana saw 2 Nazis directly in front of her. Having hastily eliminated the enemy, the girl returned to the camp, but restless thoughts did not leave her mind. The premonition turned out to be prophetic. After a while, the blurring in her eyes was repeated, and just a little later it became permanent. It was a real blow to the girl. It became perfectly clear to her that she would have to forget about these sniper activities. Her superiors were adamant and insisted that Bermzina leave the front, but for her it was unacceptable. With great difficulty, she managed to persuade her to keep her position as a liaison officer with the duty of a nurse. The girl felt that she had not yet accomplished her main feat, and she turned out to be right. In early July of 1944, Tatiana, as a member of her group, was transferred to the enemy rear to perform the most difficult combat mission: to capture the main road junction and hold it until the arrival of the main forces. To carry out the order, it was necessary to entrench themselves in the area of the village of Pekalin. A small unit of Soviet soldiers approached the specified settlement and unexpectedly encountered a Nazi unit that far outnumbered them numerically. A battle ensued, as a result of which the Russians were gradually pushed back toward the woods. Tatiana, under incessant fire, never stopped helping the wounded for a moment. And then she caught sight of a rifle thrown by someone. Without hesitation, she picked up the weapon and fired all the ammunition she had at the enemy. But the forces were too unequal. The detachment of Soviet fighters was almost completely destroyed. The remnants of the squad divided into two parts. Some retreated to the woods, while others, together with the wounded, among whom was Tatiana, took refuge in some sort of dugout not far from the village. Those who remained in the dugout were annihilated, nor did the brave sniper escape her terrible fate. When she ran out of ammunition, she continued to pelt the enemy with grenades, thus lasting over an entire hour. But when they ran out of ammunition, the Nazis captured the unruly woman. The Nazis, furious that several of their comrades had been shot and blown up by some woman, they had tortured her to death before brutally executing her. What the Nazis did to her is beyond definition of what should be considered cruel. They literally cut Tatiana to pieces with knives, cut off the girl's breasts and gouged out her eyes, and shot her in the head at point-blank range with an anti-tank rifle. This was the unfortunate ending for her. Tatiana was identified only by fragments of clothing and a scrap of hair. As a result, the girl's corpse was disfigured to such an extent that she could only be identified during a later examination based on the remnants of her hair. Shortly before the end of the war, the brave girl was posthumously awarded two of the highest awards of the Soviet Union. Subscribe for more videos.